You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you may not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. That's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
To enjoy this episode ad-free, please visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
Every single day in America, over 1,600 people are reported missing. Most are found quickly. But on August 9th, 2013, 26-year-old Brandon Lawson became a statistic that the internet would spend over a decade trying to decode. Stranded after running out of gas on a pitch-black stretch of Highway 277 in Texas, Brandon called 911. Through heavy static and breathless panic, he told dispatchers, "My truck ran out of gas. The guy's chasing me into the woods. Please hurry." For years, amateur sleuths and audio experts cleaned up the tape, arguing over what or who was in those woods. In late 2024, state investigators confirmed a grim reality. Brandon's remains had finally been found. But his identification didn't solve the mystery, it only deepened it. Today, we step away from the internet rumors to look at the cold, hard logistics and forensic evidence of the case file. This is Forensic Tales, episode 342, The Death of Brandon Lawson. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used to uncover the truth. If you enjoy deep dives into real cases and the science behind them, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if you want even more content, including monthly full-length bonus episodes and early ad-free access to over 300 episodes, you can join our community over on Patreon. The support there truly helps keep the show going. To learn more, visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales. And one small favor that makes a huge difference for the show. If you're enjoying Forensic Tales, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other listeners discover the podcast. In the summer of 2013, 26-year-old Brandon Lawson had a lot to live for. He was the father of 4 young children. He was in a 10-year relationship with his girlfriend and had a very demanding job that required long hours in Texas's oil fields. But behind the scenes, things weren't as stable as they appeared. Those closest to Brandon would later describe a man who had been struggling with drug use in the months leading up to his disappearance, a battle that had begun putting increasing strain on both his personal life and his relationships. Born on November 18, 1986, to Bradley and Kimberly Lawson in Fort Worth, Texas, Brandon grew up in a large family and had a relatively happy childhood. He was the kind of kid who could spend hours on end outdoors with his brothers, Kyle and Billy, and sister Brittany. They did anything you could think of, from fishing to camping to just hanging out in sleeping bags under the stars. And as a kid, his biggest early goal was to save up to eventually own a pickup truck. Brandon was just a junior in high school when he met sophomore Ledessa Lofton. There was just something about her that caught his eye, and it didn't take him long to ask for her phone number in the school's hallway. That decision would ultimately lead to a decade-long relationship and 3 beautiful children together. Ledessa would also become the stepmother to one of Brandon's children from a previous relationship. So together, they had 4 children and all lived together in San Angelo, Texas. In the weeks before his disappearance, Brandon was working almost 95 hours a week in the oil fields. It wasn't uncommon for him to work 12, 13, or even 14-hour days. And these weren't easy days sitting at a desk in an air-conditioned office. Brandon was out in the sun, working in the hot Texas oil fields for hours and days on end. And the work didn't stop once he clocked out of work. He had a newborn son, 3 other children, and a girlfriend to take care of. So, although Brandon knew he had to support his family, the long hours were starting to take a toll on him. And he had even mentioned to Ledessa that he had started looking for a new job. But he would never get the opportunity. August 8th, 2013, wasn't a good day for Brandon Lawson. He had spent another really long day at work, and he and Ledessa got into a pretty bad argument. According to an interview with his brother Kyle on the Crawlspace podcast, Brandon had recently turned to using drugs as a way to cope with the long work hours, raising 4 children, and just the everyday pressures of life. And his drug of choice soon became methamphetamine. Meth is an incredibly powerful stimulant. It can keep someone awake for long periods of time, increase energy, and create a false sense of confidence. But it can also have the opposite effect. Especially after prolonged use, it can lead to paranoia, anxiety, irrational thinking, and in some cases, even hallucinations. That doesn't mean every person who uses meth experiences those symptoms, but they're well-documented effects of the drug. So on the evening of August 8th, Brandon and Ledessa got into a fight because Brandon hadn't returned home the night before, and she was upset about his drug use. Following the argument, Brandon got in his silver Ford pickup truck at around 10:45 that night and left the house intending to drive to his father's house in the town of Crowley, which was a 3-hour drive away. The fight with his girlfriend really upset him, and he wanted to get as far away from her as possible. It's also unclear whether drugs had anything to do with this decision to leave the house or not. But before he headed out the front door, he made a mistake. He didn't check how much gas was in the pickup truck. Sometime around midnight, Ledessa picked up the phone and called Brandon because she was worried about him. She knew he was really upset from their argument, and she worried he might be high on drugs, which could be a deadly combination out there on the roads. So Ledessa told him he should make the much shorter drive to his brother's house and spend the night there instead. While it's unclear whether he took her advice, it appears Brandon changed direction and started driving north on Highway 277 towards Abilene, abandoning his journey to his dad's house on Highway 67. Highway 277 is the kind of road that feels incredibly isolated after dark. Once the sun goes down, there aren't many lights around, just miles of open Texas landscape and whatever your headlights happen to illuminate. While going down the many rabbit holes associated with this case, one theory comes up again and again. Some people believe Brandon didn't turn onto Highway 277 by accident. Instead, they think he deliberately changed course to avoid running into law enforcement. At the time, he had an active felony warrant out for his arrest. So rather than continuing toward his brother's house, it's possible he headed down the more rural highway in an effort to stay out of sight. Somewhere along the way, Brandon realized his truck was running out of gas and he wasn't going to make it to either his dad's or brother's places. So he decided to try to make the 30-minute drive to the Stripes convenience store and gas station to fill up his rapidly dwindling tank. But he never made it. Back at the house, LaDessa decided to call Brandon's brother, Kyle, to let him know what was going on. She was really worried about him and didn't know what else to do. She also had their 4 kids to watch at the house, so she couldn't jump in her car to go look for him. So that's when Kyle and his wife offered to come by the house. About 45 minutes after Brandon took off in his truck, he too called Kyle, but for totally different reasons. He told his brother that he had run out of gas and was stuck on the side of the road somewhere off Highway 277 near Bronte. But Kyle had a hard time hearing everything Brandon was saying because there wasn't very good cell phone service out there in the middle of nowhere. But what Kyle did hear was deeply disturbing. At one point during the phone call, Brandon told Kyle that 3 expletive are chasing me out of town. The slur he used referred to Mexicans, and the comment immediately raised red flags for Kyle. Knowing Brandon's history with methamphetamine, he asked him point blank if he was high or hallucinating. But Brandon insisted he wasn't. But Kyle wasn't convinced his brother was telling the whole truth. He thought Brandon sounded confused, almost agitated, the same type of behavior he usually exhibited when he was high on drugs. So after hanging up, he called LaDessa and asked her to leave a gas can out on the front porch so he could pick it up on his way to Brandon. So LaDessa did exactly that before taking a shower and heading to bed. Her cell phone was nearly dead, so she left it charging in her van because she didn't have a working charger at home. Unfortunately, that meant she never heard the several calls that both Brandon and Kyle tried to make to her that night. And as far as she knew, Brandon had simply run out of gas and would be home by morning. Somewhere in the midst of the chaos that night, Brandon also called his brother's wife, Audrey. And during that brief conversation, he told her that he was bleeding. But before she could figure out what had happened or where he was injured, the poor cell connection cut the conversation short, so she wasn't able to get any more information out of him. To this day, no one knows what Brandon meant by that statement. Whether he had suffered a minor injury while running through the rough terrain, been involved in some kind of altercation, or was referring to something else entirely has never been determined. Getting to Brandon wasn't going to be as simple as filling up a gas can. Kyle was waiting for his paycheck to clear, so the plan was to drive out to Brandon's location first, get some cash from him, then head to the nearest gas station before returning to his truck. But when Kyle and his wife finally arrived where Brandon said he would be, he was gone. His truck, however, wasn't. Parked right beside it was a patrol car. There were no obvious signs of a crash, no broken glass, and nothing to suggest that a struggle had taken place. But earlier that night, a passing motorist had noticed the truck sitting partially in the roadway and called law enforcement to report it. And by the time Kyle arrived, an officer was already on scene. According to Kyle, Brandon kept saying, "I can see you. I'm right here." But Kyle couldn't see Brandon anywhere. Neither could the deputy standing beside the truck. It almost felt like Brandon and Kyle were playing 2 completely different games of hide and seek. Brandon was convinced he was nearby, while Kyle was staring into nothing but darkness. At first, Kyle thought he knew exactly what was happening. Brandon had an active felony warrant out for his arrest, so maybe he was hiding from the deputy. Kyle figured that once the officer finished up and drove away, Brandon would come walking out from wherever he was hiding. The warrant itself wasn't for a violent offense. It stemmed from a previous drug possession case in Johnson County, Texas. According to court records, Brandon had failed to pay a court-ordered fee related to that conviction, resulting in a felony warrant being issued. So, from Kyle's perspective, it made perfect sense that Brandon would be doing everything he could to avoid another trip to jail. But the deputy eventually left, and Brandon never came out. After speaking with the deputy for several minutes and waiting for Brandon to emerge from wherever he was hiding, Kyle decided to drive a short distance up the road. He still believed Brandon was simply lying low until the police left and figured they could meet farther away from the truck. So he waited. 5 minutes turned into 10. 10 turned into 30. Nearly 45 minutes passed, and Brandon never showed up. At some point, Kyle realized this wasn't going according to plan. Whatever was happening to Brandon, he wasn't coming out. Before heading home, Kyle drove back to Brandon's pickup truck one last time, left the gas can behind, hoping his brother would eventually find it, and called it a night. Several hours later, around 5 o'clock that morning, Kyle drove back to where Brandon's truck had been left. He was surprised, and probably more than a little concerned, to find it still sitting there. If Brandon had simply been hiding from the deputy, he should have been back by now. 3 hours later, at around 8 o'clock, the truck was towed away, and still there was no sign of Brandon. Investigators took note of several important details inside the pickup. All of the doors were unlocked, suggesting Brandon may have expected to return after only a short time. There were no obvious signs of a struggle or anything to suggest someone had forced him out of the vehicle. But 3 important items were gone: his keys, his wallet, and his cell phone. For the next couple of days, there was an extensive search for him, focused on the area where his truck had been found on Highway 277. These searches included the use of cadaver dogs, infrared cameras, and aerial searches. But there was absolutely no sign of him. It was like he completely vanished into the Texas darkness. For Brandon's family, they couldn't shake the feeling that maybe something bad happened to him. Although they suspected he might have been high on drugs at the time, they couldn't forget about his strange phone calls, like the one to Kyle's wife saying he was bleeding, or what he told Kyle about men chasing him out of town. As much as they wanted to believe he was just having drug-related hallucinations and would show up once he came down from the high, they couldn't shake the other possibilities. Maybe this wasn't drug-related, and all the crazy things he was saying on the phone might have actually been true. Friends and family had even used the power of social media and created a Facebook page called Help Find Brandon Lawson, which, as of 2025, had over 29,000 followers. They also didn't think Brandon would have voluntarily left without his children. Here's what Kyle said about that in an interview. "My brother might have been a felon and might have messed with drugs, and he might have relapsed, but he loved his children. He took care of his children. He was a good person. He wasn't some dope fiend living on the streets, robbing people, or trying to get over on someone to get high again." But any hope of there being a happy ending was crushed as soon as Brandon's 911 call surfaced. About 3 days after his disappearance, it was discovered that among the phone calls Brandon made that night, one of them was to 911 at around 12:50. Chances are, if you've heard about this case before, then you know all about the call. It's one of the most mysterious aspects of this entire story. And once you hear it for yourself, it's almost impossible to forget. Now, before we get into all the details, I want to play a small clip of that call for you. Just a warning, the audio is really bad, but I want to play it because this call is a very important piece of the puzzle.
911 emergency.
Yes, I'm in the middle of the field. The Staple just pushed some guys over. Right here going towards Javelin on both sides. My truck ran out of gas. There's one car here. Got taken to the woods. Please hurry.
Okay, now run that by me.
I'm not talking to him. I actually ran into him.
Ah, you ran into him. Okay.
That's the first guy.
Do you need an ambulance?
Yeah. No, I need the cops.
Okay. Is anybody hurt? Hello? Hello? Hello?
I know the audio isn't very clear, but it sounds like Brandon said he needs the police, that his truck ran out of gas, and that he accidentally ran into him. He then goes on to say something about people chasing him through a field. While no one's quite sure what he meant by ran into him, most people seem to think he means he ran into some people, not that he literally hit them with his car. He said he didn't need an ambulance, but he needed the cops as quickly as possible. Then after that, the connection went dead. But not before many people described hearing a whispered plea for help or a distant noise that some thought could be a gunshot, though others attributed it to wind or a slamming door. It's strange that Brandon said he didn't need an ambulance because just moments earlier when he called his brother's wife, he told her he was bleeding. It's also unclear whether the people he said were chasing him were the same people he told his brother about in that earlier phone call. But for me, it isn't necessarily what Brandon says on this 54-second call that sticks with me. It's how he sounds. He sounds completely frantic, almost out of breath, like someone who's desperately trying to keep moving while talking on the phone. As I listen to the call, I can't help but picture Brandon stumbling through the darkness, trying to get words out while constantly looking over his shoulder. But what really gets me is the timing. Brandon placed that 911 call at approximately 12:50 a.m. Just 20 minutes later, a Coke County deputy arrived to find his pickup truck abandoned, partially blocking the roadway. The truck was there, but Brandon wasn't. Whatever happened during those 20 minutes changed the course of this entire case. Over the years, this 54-second phone call has been dissected over and over again. Amateur audio experts, professional investigators, podcasters, and thousands of people online have listened to it countless times, each convinced they're hearing something different. Some people believe Brandon was genuinely being chased by one or more individuals that night. Others believe the fear in his voice was real, but the threat he was describing wasn't, that it was the result of paranoia brought on by methamphetamine use. And then there are those who think the truth lies somewhere in the middle, that Brandon may have encountered someone out there, but because of his mental state, he wasn't able to accurately describe what was happening. The problem is that the audio is so poor, there's simply no way to know with certainty. Depending on who you ask, you'll hear completely different interpretations of what Brandon said, what he meant, and even what can be heard in the background. That's what makes this call so frustrating. Instead of answering questions, it creates even more of them. With so few answers and almost no physical evidence pointing investigators in one direction or another, they had to keep every possibility on the table. Was Brandon truly being chased by someone that night? Was he experiencing paranoia brought on by methamphetamine use? Had he suffered some kind of accident after leaving his truck? Or had he intentionally disappeared? As unlikely as that last theory may seem to those who knew him, investigators couldn't simply rule it out. One detail that fueled the voluntary disappearance theory was Brandon's finances. Sometime after he disappeared, it was discovered that he had recently initiated the process of cashing out his retirement account. He did this with his employer at the time, Renegade Oil Services, which led many to wonder whether he had chosen to run away. But that's a theory his longtime girlfriend, Ledessa, has always rejected. She explained that while Brandon had begun the paperwork, he never actually withdrew the money. Even more telling, his final paycheck, which was deposited into his bank account the very day he disappeared, was never spent. Eventually, those funds were turned over to the state to satisfy his child support obligations. But it wasn't just Brandon's finances that caused investigators to lean heavily toward this running away theory early on the investigation. First, there was the active felony warrant I talked about a little earlier in the episode. Brandon knew he could be arrested if he came into contact with law enforcement, giving him a reason to avoid police that night. Then, there was the deputy's arrival. Just minutes after Brandon's frantic 911 call, a Coke County deputy pulled up behind his abandoned truck. If Brandon saw those flashing lights from a distance, it's possible he fled into the surrounding brush simply to avoid being taken into custody. His personal life also wasn't exactly calm. Brandon had gotten into a heated argument with Ledessa shortly before leaving the house. So some wondered whether he had simply reached a breaking point and decided to walk away from everything. And finally, there was the truck itself. Early on, some investigators questioned whether Brandon had actually run out of gas at all. If the truck had been intentionally left on the side of the highway, it could have served as a distraction, making it appear as though something unexpected had happened, when in reality, Brandon had planned to disappear. But the voluntary disappearance theory wasn't the only explanation investigators considered. Another theory, and one that gained significant traction over the years, was that Brandon was experiencing a substance-induced psychotic episode. By this point, those closest to Brandon had acknowledged that he had recently relapsed and was using methamphetamine again. So combined with the stress of work, lack of sleep, and the events of that evening, some investigators believe Brandon's perception of reality may have become severely distorted. They point to the frantic 911 call, his repeated claims that people were chasing him, his insistence that Kyle could see him when he clearly couldn't, and his references to people hiding in the brush. From that perspective, Brandon wasn't necessarily running from an actual threat. He believed there was one. Of course, not everyone agreed with that conclusion. Others remained convinced Brandon really was being chased that night. Supporters of this theory believe his fear wasn't imagined at all. They argue Brandon may have stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see. They point to his repeated pleas for police, the statement that people were chasing him through a field, his claim that he was bleeding, and audio that some listeners believe contains gunshots or other voices. If that's what happened, Brandon may have been murdered, with his body hidden somewhere in the surrounding ranch land. And then there's perhaps the most controversial theory of them all. Over the years, some people began questioning whether law enforcement knew more than they admitted. Much of this speculation centered on disputed interpretations of the recording and the fact that a deputy arrived at Brandon's truck only minutes after the call ended. So, some internet sleuths have argued Brandon mentioned a state trooper during the call, or that officers overlooked crucial evidence at the scene. But it's important to point out that there has never been any credible evidence linking law enforcement to Brandon's disappearance. And much of this theory is based on speculation and disputed interpretations of poor quality audio. For almost an entire decade, those theories remained just that, theories. There simply wasn't enough evidence to know which one, if any, was correct. Then, nearly 9 years after he vanished, investigators made a discovery that changed this case forever. Brandon Lawson had finally been found. On February 4th, 2022, Brandon's family shared an update on the Help Find Brandon Lawson Facebook page, announcing that an independent missing persons advocacy group was conducting a search of the area where his truck had been abandoned. As the search team carefully made their way through the rugged terrain, they came across something that immediately caught their attention. Scattered among the brush were several pieces of discarded clothing. At first, there was no way to know who they belonged to, but almost immediately, Brandon's family recognized them. According to LaDessa, the clothing matched what Brandon had been wearing the night he disappeared, including his shorts and his shoes. After nearly 9 years with virtually no physical or forensic evidence, this was the first major break in the case. It also suggested something investigators had long suspected, that whatever happened to Brandon likely happened much closer to his abandoned truck than many people had originally believed. But the search didn't stop there. Immediately following the discovery of the clothing, the search group contacted authorities, and the Coke County Sheriff's Department and the Texas Rangers quickly mobilized to secure the area. What had started as a volunteer search was now an official forensic recovery operation. Investigators expanded the search grid around where the clothing had been found, carefully combing through the rugged terrain. Then, roughly 400 yards away, and about a mile from where Brandon's truck had been abandoned nearly 9 years earlier, they made another discovery. They found partial human remains.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Over the following weeks, forensic recovery teams continued searching the area, eventually recovering a skull cap, along with several other skeletal elements scattered throughout the brush. And later that same day, Brandon's family shared the heartbreaking news on the Help Find Brandon Lawson Facebook page. While formal identification would still be required, they wrote, "In our hearts, we know that it is Brandon." The location of the discovery also helped explain why Brandon had remained hidden for so long. The remains were found on private hunting property covered in dense brush, thick cactus, and rough terrain. And over the course of nearly a decade, exposure to the elements, natural erosion, and animal activity had scattered the skeletal remains, making them incredibly difficult to locate despite years of searches. And unfortunately, even after the remains were recovered, the investigation wasn't over. Because Brandon's body had been exposed to the harsh Texas environment for nearly 9 years, forensic scientists faced another challenge: obtaining a usable DNA sample. The remains were so degraded that the initial testing came back inconclusive, leaving Brandon's family waiting nearly 3 more years for the answers they had desperately hoped were finally within reach. To increase the likelihood of making a positive identification, investigators turned to Brandon's family. His father provided a sample, allowing forensic scientists to compare his genetic profile with evidence recovered from the skull cap. Then finally, just days before Christmas in 2024, they had their answer. the Texas Ranger leading the investigation called LaDessa with the news she had waited more than 11 years to hear. The laboratory had confirmed a positive identification. Based on the forensic analysis, investigators determined there was an approximately 82% genetic match between Brandon's father's profile and the profile recovered from the remains, officially confirming they belonged to Brandon Lawson. On Christmas Day, Brandon's family shared the news publicly on the Help Find Brandon Lawson Facebook page. And while the confirmation was heartbreaking, LaDessa said she was grateful they could finally bring Brandon home. But even with Brandon's identity finally confirmed, one critical question remained unanswered. How did he die? Unfortunately, the forensic evidence couldn't provide that answer. Because the remains were skeletal and had been exposed to the elements for so many years, investigators were unable to determine an official cause or manner of death. Soft tissue, which often provides forensic pathologists with evidence of trauma, disease, hemorrhaging, or injury, had long since decomposed. If Brandon had suffered any injuries, if he had died from dehydration, if he had experienced some type of accident, or even if he had sustained certain blunt force injuries, many of those answers may simply have disappeared with time, and not even forensic anthropology can tell us what exactly happened to him. Although Brandon had finally been identified, the process wasn't over just yet. Because of the legal and administrative steps that follow a forensic identification, several more months passed before the state of Texas officially released Brandon's remains to his family. That finally happened on July 18, 2025. To help cover the costs of transporting his remains, his cremation, and a memorial service, LaDessa created a GoFundMe campaign titled Help Lay Brandon Lawson to Rest. Supporters from across the country, many of whom had followed Brandon's case for years, quickly rallied around the family, helping the fundraiser exceed its original goal. The family decided Brandon would be cremated, with his ashes shared among his parents and his 4 children. Then, in August 2025, they gathered with friends, loved ones, and members of the true crime community for a public memorial service. After 4,362 days of searching, Brandon Lawson was finally laid to rest. So, what happened to him? More than a decade later, the honest answer is, we still don't know. We know he left home after arguing with his girlfriend. We know he had recently been using methamphetamine. We know he sounded terrified during his final phone calls. We know he abandoned his truck, carrying only his phone, wallet, and keys. And we know his remains were eventually found about a mile from where that truck had been sitting all along. Those are the facts. Everything else is interpretation. Some believe Brandon was suffering from meth-induced psychosis and became hopelessly lost in the rugged West Texas landscape. Others remain convinced someone else was out there with him that night. The discovery of Brandon's remains ruled out some theories, but it didn't answer the biggest question of all. Why did he leave the safety of his truck? And what happened during those final 20 minutes after he called 911? In many cases, forensic science provides the missing piece investigators have been searching for. It identifies the victim, it identifies the suspect. Sometimes, it even tells investigators exactly how a person died. In Brandon Lawson's case, forensic science accomplished something incredibly important. It gave a family certainty. After 11 years of wondering where their son, brother, father was, they were finally able to bring him home. But despite everything modern forensic science was able to accomplish, Brandon Lawson's final moments remain one of the most haunting mysteries in Texas history. To share your thoughts on the Brandon Lawson story, Be sure to follow us on social media at Forensic Tales. And if you want to listen to new episodes early and ad-free, consider signing up for our Patreon at patreon.com/forensictales. You can get early ad-free access to new episodes and monthly full-length bonus episodes for as little as $3 a month. Your support on Patreon directly helps to fund the show's production, research, and editing costs. And as an independent, one-woman podcast, your support truly helps to keep this show going. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to support the show and help fund research, production, and editing, you can do so with a small monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content. You can learn more at patreon.com/forensictales. Thank you so much to this week's newest Patreon supporters, April, Sarah R., and Nicole K. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a positive rating or review really helps others discover it. For a full list of sources used in this episode, visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.